welcome to episode 7 of the Talking Horses podcast. By the people, for the people, the new weekly podcast that brings you reviews and previews of all the big racing weekends, as well as attempting to look behind the curtain of the sport with a view to increasing understanding, accessibility, and ultimately enjoyment of racing for all. Ben and Bruno back with you again. Given the festival is now just 12 days away, how can we start with anything else? Bruno, firstly, how are you? And secondly, how excited are you for Cheltenham Festival Week?
Yeah, I think I can answer those two questions in one go. I'm starting to jig around a little bit with excitement. It's particularly, there's lots of things in this for me. First, it's been 2 years, isn't it? So there's a lot of pent up excitement. In fact, quick story about how we opened the festival last year. I'd just been made redundant 2 weeks prior, so that was good timing for the festival. And I drove over some quality fried chicken to your back garden, and we watched the Supreme on an iPad.
It was memorable, and it was enjoyable.
Yeah, different.
I'm forever grateful for you bringing over high quality fried chicken. But I think you're quite happy to just do that once, weren't we?
Yeah, once is fine, and that'll be it. So back to it proper.
You got back in time for the Arkle, didn't you?
No, I think I stayed for the Arkle and then listened to the Ultima on the way home.
Okay.
And then back for the Champion Hurdle.
Lovely stuff. Yeah. Remarkable. Well, it's going to be very different this year, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Back to the ways we used to do it. So I guess we're going. Well, I'll be there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're there together Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah. It's just, I know everyone has their own Cheltenham stories and the sort of favourite things about the place, about the racing, etc. What are the things that you look forward to most about going to Cheltenham for Racing Week?
I think it's the whole day, starting from when you wake up. I guess for me it'll be that Wednesday morning. You'll have been at the track Tuesday, and we'll take it relatively easy Tuesday night, won't we? In theory. That's the best laid plans and all that. But Wednesday morning, hearty brunch, probably at the Boston Tea Party, which is a great little spot in town. And then it's that walk up, which is it's wonderful, isn't it? Because you sort of start off in the middle of Cheltenham town centre, and it's kind of, there's a buzz around the place, but there's also people going about their day to day as well. But then when you start on the road up to the course, then obviously there's the masses all flocking in that general direction, and that's when the buzz really starts. And then I guess we get to the track midday?
Something like that? Normally something like that. It's about the first race is normally 1:30, isn't it, for the festival week?
Yes.
So get there with a bit of time to spare.
And it's such a cracking venue. It's pretty vast, but you can also cut through to. So I guess what we'll do is get in there, pick up a Guinness probably on the way through, and you've got the parade. If you walk straight through the gates and carry on walking, you've got the parade ring on your left pretty quickly. So we'll be knocking about there for a little bit, maybe go through to the Guinness Village, and then it's just a countdown, really, isn't it, till 1:30 and that first race of the day, and it's just going to be good, isn't it? It's just going to feel extra exciting.
Yeah, totally.
So kicking off the day like that is what I'm kind of looking forward to most in a way, because that's the bit where you're fresh in the week, aren't you, on that Wednesday morning? Even if you've been at the track Tuesday, there's still freshness around it, because you're doing a different, obviously company-based thing Tuesday, so it's a different vibe for you.
Yes.
And you still, you're not totally in arrears with your betting position for the week either. Things are still hopeful, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Although I think historically my Tuesdays have been pretty poor, and then my Wednesdays. So thinking on to sort of favourite festival memories, which was something I wanted to ask you about. But actually, that kind of leads nicely into mine, which was on a Wednesday, and I think we'd had the Tuesday. I'd made the mistake of telling all, because we take clients on a Tuesday, and I made the mistake of either I told everyone or my colleagues had told all our clients that I was really into racing, and so everyone's coming up to me, going, "Oh, who should we back for this one?" And of course, I tell them my selections, and I didn't have anything even come close to that. I think it was actually it was 3 years ago now, so yeah, I can't even remember what I had, but it wasn't a good day. And then you and I got together on the Wednesday morning, and I think you beat me in the Ballymore. You had City Island.
That's my race. The Ballymore's my race. Got a cracking record in that. Yeah.
It's funny how that...
three on the bounce. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the last two were shorties. City Island was definitely a sweet one because that was 8-1, I think, and a bit under the radar for
absolutely
for the lesser known Martin Brassel, Dr. Brassel,
and he beat Champ.
He did.
Who was the horse that I'd backed. But then we had we met Martin Keown that day, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
For you as an Arsenal fan, was it was interesting. Was it an underwhelming experience?
Yeah, quite underwhelming. I think he's a reserved character, apart from when he's faced with Ruud van Nistelrooy.
And he's not a big horse racing fan, I think it's fair to say.
He was quoting numbers rather than names of horses.
Yeah.
When he was telling me his selections, but he was there enjoying it, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, exactly. I mean, it's open to all. It's the festival, and that's one of the reasons it's so great. But yeah, that afternoon we had Altior, closely followed by Tiger Roll in the cross country, and I think we backed them both. We backed them in doubles, and it was just And I think we. Then off out into town that evening. Oh, and then we had Envoy Hélène in the bumper.
We did, exactly. Yeah, no, it was a beautiful day. I mean, Tiger Roll was an absolute procession that year, even more so than it was last year, or similar levels anyway. And we knew from way out that he couldn't lose really. So it's nice, that feeling, isn't it, when you're on one and it's just like, this is, barring an absolute disaster, this is just going out absolutely the right way we want it to. Yeah. So yeah, that is in terms of festival memories. I'm with you. That is the day that sticks out for sure. And then walking back, I remember that being a particularly sort of buzzy moment where you've had a great day at the track, regardless of the results, and you've got the evening ahead and 2 more days to go. So that's the sweet spot of the week for me. Every year we've been.
Yeah, exactly. You still you feel like you've had a load of fun already, but there's half of it is left to come. Yeah, totally. No, so that's well, there you go. Our favourite festival memories are the same. Have you got a day or a race that you're particularly looking forward to this year's festival?
I think Wednesday. I think the reason why we like Wednesday is because generally the quality of the racing is really high on the Wednesday. And this year, again, that promises. We're still waiting to find out how that Ballymore is shaping up, but it promises to be pretty strong on that Wednesday. I'm just trying to think of the other days. Really, I'd probably have to go with the Wednesday again. I know that's really dull because that aligns with our memories, but that feels certainly that Ballymore. If there's one of those big 4 or 5 in the supreme betting ends up going there, which is likely to happen, then that's going to be very, very exciting way to start the day. And then obviously that day, hopefully we'll see Tiger Roll winning and retired and bringing the house down in doing so, because that will be, I think, so special.
That would be, for me, the race that I'm most looking forward to, because it's pretty likely that they'll retire him on the spot if he wins.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody, some people expected him to win last year, but I don't think going into it, anybody really felt he had anywhere near as good a chance as he had done in previous years going into the festival. But there was nobody there. And for him to sort of do that in front of nobody, it feels like there's unfinished business. So, look, fate works in funny ways, but that would be a pretty spectacular thing.
What about yourself? Any other days particularly sticking out to you?
Well, I was really looking forward to the Brown Advisory, but it appears that Galopin des Champs is now going to go for the Turners. So with that in mind, it's still Brave Man's Game versus Ahoy Senior, and there'll be others in there from Ireland that have a chance, Capitano, etc. That is an interesting race. I can't wait for the bumper as well. That's going to be mighty. I think the race I'm probably most looking forward to in the whole week, though, just because it's where I've got my biggest bet is the Ultima on the Tuesday.
Okay.
So if Corax Rambler wins the Ultima on the Tuesday, then we might be eating in different establishments for the rest.
Oh, great!
Put it that way.
Yeah, lovely. We might upgrade our accommodation so we've all got a bed to sleep in.
Yeah, absolutely. Such is the joy of Cheltenham week that you spend vast sums of money and you're not even guaranteed a bed.
We're rotating, aren't we? That's the agreed policy.
We are. Yes,
Yeah.
we are. There's blow-up mattresses and all sorts being thrown into the equation. So anyway, it's so much fun. I'm so excited for us. I'm so excited for everybody listening to the pod and everybody else out there that we are going to have a Cheltenham Festival, perhaps like no other, given the levels of excitement that have built over the last 2 years. So we are going to slightly rejig the format of the pod this week, and we're going to go straight in round and tackle the review of the racing from last weekend a little bit later on in the show. So this week we have decided to have a look at Pedigree. Now, I think we've tackled some fairly hefty issues the last few weeks in Deep Ground, and it's tempting to sort of try and find something else that's equally contentious. But we don't necessarily want to spend all of our time talking about problems with the sport, because there's lots of good things about the sport as well. And fundamentally, Deep Ground is an opportunity to look, as I say at the top of the show, behind the curtain of the sport and increase enjoyment and understanding. And I think, Pedigree is something that, Bruno, you and I have probably, we've been racing fans for properly for maybe sort of 7-8 years. And it's only really in the last year or two that we've started to just consider the Pedigree side of things, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, even less than that. I'd say last few months, really, or start of this current jump season. Or maybe actually, to be more accurate on that, probably when we got into ownership of a horse running on the flat, because the Pedigree side there is all important, because it gives you an indication as to the potential, right race, right trip for the horse that you've got. So that's where it became really kind of abundantly clear to me that this is an important part of the sport. I guess where I found it useful if I'm assessing a race is that it just gives you that little bit of extra information, particularly with those younger horses. So, for example, on the flat, where the horses generally, start off as 2-year-olds racing, going up to maybe 5 or 6, but also over obstacles as well, particularly when you're dealing with novice hurdlers. We don't have that much back form to go on. You've got, an idea of how they run in point to points, for example. But the Pedigree bit just adds that little bit of extra layer of information where you can assess whether the horse is right for that trip. So I found that really, really interesting. And what I've also looked at this week, it's a hugely lucrative part of the sport. It's probably where the majority of the money in the sport actually resides.
Yeah.
So even just in the UK, I read that the whole bloodstock industry, which is essentially the breeding of thoroughbred horses, that industry is worth 3 billion to the UK economy. Wow. And when you go over to Ireland, I'm sure that will take up an even bigger proportion of the overall economy. And it's a global thing as well, with big players in the Middle East coming into it. So it's hugely lucrative to get into it. So there's loads more for me to find out about it. But yeah, just starting to pique my interest for sure, as to how it all connects together, from how a horse is bred, how it's going to race, and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting, but probably still quite removed from the central focus of the sport to the mainstream, kind of the mainstream audience, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think that's probably because, we are evidence of the fact that you don't necessarily go into that straight away. When you start, if most people join the sport through going to race days, having a bet, having a few beers, whatever it might be, you're unlikely to be delving into the Pedigree side of things on the way to the racecourse. I'd imagine it's something that generally comes later in life, if you've come to the sport that way. Obviously, if you've come into it through kind of the equine world, then you're probably going to be much more aware of that stuff and much more interested in that stuff, maybe even over and above the kind of betting side of it. But we as we've mentioned before, but we own shares in a few horses with Rudy Racing up at Manor House Stables, and we've now got Hugo Palmer as our trainer, which is
confirmed,
very exciting.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was interviewed on Nick Luck last week, actually.
Mm.
But yeah, so we'll be up there to Chester soon and meet Hugo and see our horses. But when we first got involved, which was 18 months ago now, and you're buying the horses at the sales, and you have nothing else to go on because they're unraced. They're yearlings, so they're one basically, and they're bought sort of in October with a view to starting to race in a sort of March, April the following year. And so you've got a 6-month period of, well, I don't know anything about this horse. So the only thing you can do, but equally the thing you kind of want to do is go, right, well, how do I, study more, find out more about it? And it's understanding the lineage. So Devious Angel was our filly last year. Cotai Glory was her sire, her dad, to use a common phrase that probably is one that people use and plenty of people probably don't even know what sire refers to. Her dam, her mum, is a horse called Angel Meadow. And it was fascinating looking into the sort of the Angel Meadows racing career was relatively brief, but she had a tenacity to her racing style. And I remember, I forget where it was now, but I think it was her first or second start. She broke terribly out the stalls, was way out the back, came through and won. And won sort of in the final strides, and really sort of stuck her neck out. When you watch horses run, you can see the ones that really do push their head forward and try. And so you thought, okay, this is interesting. Hopefully that is something that translates to our filly. And Cotai Glory similarly was not quite Grade 1 level sprinter, but certainly he was competing in Grade 1s and winning Grade 2s and 3s. I say he's not, just to start again, group. I mean, I'm using jumps terminology.
Yeah, that's
not a group. I say that actually. I'm not even sure whether he was a Group 1 winner, but either way, you could sort of start to see what characterised the dam and the sire of our filly. And lo and behold, she won 4 times last season, showed an amazing attitude. Was limited in her potential based on her pedigree compared to plenty of other horses that she was racing against. So it was just fascinating to sort of piece it all together and try and work out whether we thought that she would get 6 furlongs, where she'd been primarily racing over 5. So that I think that definitely getting involved with our own horses has particularly on the flat has made that very interesting.
Yeah, and the thing you start to realize when you look into it, you might click into a horse's profile and you'll see that their lineage is referenced as well. Once you start to sort of do that over and over again and take note of it, you start to see these prominent sires in the racing world, and you start to notice that, oh, okay, that one's related to that one who's done this over a similar distance. So that's where it kind of gets interesting for me, is where I start to make that link and those connections myself. Really, that's where I'm getting satisfaction from it. And that, again, like I said before, it just gives you an insight into what that horse could do. I've got a quiz question for you, just to put into perspective the size of this bloodstock industry. Do you know who the most expensive horse ever sold still is?
Frankel.
It's not. It's still a horse that was sold in the year 2000, a horse called Fusaichi Pegasus, who won the Kentucky Derby, which is probably America's most famous horse race.
Yeah.
Coolmore, which is probably the leading global, breeder of thoroughbred horses, bought the horse, and the expectation was that was going to, pay back handsomely in the amount of Group 1 winners that horse was going to deliver in America, in the UK and Ireland, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Complete flop.
Really?
Was actually retired.
How much was it bought for?
Oh, sorry, the horse was bought for more than £50 million. I didn't
50?
mention the figure. 50, yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that nuts? And when you consider actually the race that was run start of last week, the Saudi Cup, that's the single most kind of valuable horse race, and it's $20 million to the winner. So when you kind of compare those two figures, you can understand why there's so much money kind of weighted into the breeding side of the sport. So, but it's no guarantee in that example. But then you've got prominent sires who have delivered incredible returns on that side for these big operations like Coolmore. Godolphin's another big name, isn't it? Out of the Middle East. Juddmont's another one.
Yeah.
So these are the names that we've only, again, probably just been involved in the flat racing side of things that we've just started to take note of and see that those are the Coolmore colours that that horse is wearing, for example. So it's it's really interesting, and it clearly a hugely lucrative side of the sport. And I just thought that was a interesting little factoid for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's lucky for Coolmore that they also had Galileo. I wonder how much Galileo cost.
Yeah, probably nothing like that amount. But that balanced things out, I think, for them.
Yeah, I wonder whether although I think Galileo was, they would have bought him. They raced him, didn't they? So whereas this was a Kentucky Derby, whether they were buying as to take to stud, whereas Galileo they had, I guess, from a yearling, and they'd raced him and he won the Derby, and then maybe it's slightly different. But I thought it was very interesting as well when you sort of go on to looking at sort of a pedigree and looking at sort of at sires. Now, obviously, when you geld a horse, then you take the decision that you're not going to try and hang on to that becoming a stallion.
Yeah.
Now, the advantages of gelding obviously are to focus their mind on racing, so you'll have a more successful racehorse. But it's interesting that the vast majority of horses that race over obstacles, the vast majority of national hunt horses are geldings. Certainly the male horses, obviously, anyway. And so, you can have mares that go on and have foals that are national hunt horses. Snow Leopardess, sort of famous example. That she just had a foal and then carried on racing and having the season of her life. So
now she's pretty high up in the Grand National betting, isn't she? So,
she is, and I think Annie Power had a foal fairly recently. She probably had multiple now, to be honest. But the stallions, what you notice is it's really rare to have a horse go over jumps and be left as an entire, as it's known, so left with their balls on, basically. And I can only assume that is because of the level of risk involved. And if you've got a prime asset that is worth the sorts of figures that we've just been talking about, then jumping them over a fence is it's not really necessary in order to get the value for them, or to get the value to breed with them. But B, it's just it's risky, and we saw that with Sir Eric, who was favourite for the Triumph, I think 3 years ago at Cheltenham. And he was a flat horse trained by Joseph O'Brien, was favourite for the Triumph, and broke his leg jumping a fence down the back. And obviously the dreams of him becoming a stallion ended at that point. And then this year we have another interesting one. It's probably the first one I can remember since Sir Eric, which is in this world for the Skeltons.
Okay.
And their plan was to win the Triumph and for him to become a stallion. Now, it's interesting that, I guess there probably must be significant value in having these horses be successful as juvenile hurdlers and then have them go to stud, rather than have them as successful staying flat horses and then have them go to stud.
Yeah, I wonder if that kind of opens their market up a bit and makes them more appealing as a sire. Because then I guess another bit we should explain is that to get time with a sire to, start the process of reproducing another great star of the future, you spend a serious amount of money for each chance you get to do that. So, 6-figure sums are charged for the top sires to have their way with a mare of your choice, I suppose. And that's absolutely insane money. So I guess it would make sense if you're trying to widen your audience or your customer base for that kind of thing, that you might take the risk of going over hurdles. So was the idea within this world that he would literally go out to stud after, if he did win the Triumph?
That's my understanding. Yeah, right. I mean, I can't see that they would have carried on over fences or even over hurdles or even fences after this season, because surely that would have been the goal, was to win the Triumph, as it was with Sir Eric. Now, in this world, is injured and isn't going to make the Triumph, but was fairly short for it, or certainly, I mean, it'd be interesting to know if he'd still been around. It's already a competitive race on paper, but if he'd still been there, that would have been fascinating. But anyway, that's I think that's sort of just an interesting angle on Pedigree there, in terms of how it relates to flat and to jumps and to National Hunt. And the majority of the top National Hunt sires are indeed horses that race on the flat. So if you're looking at the sort of the kind of the Sadler's Wells, etc., of this world, their racing was done on the flat, and they've just gone on to be good sires of flat horses and jumps horses. But it's I think it's the bottom line with this is it can be pretty daunting to look into the pedigree side of horse racing, but actually it is easier than you think. And when all you have to do is go onto the Racing Post website, and if you do it here, you go into you click on a horse's name and their profile comes up. You can see the sire, you can see the dam sire, and if you want to get an idea of what sort of each of those brings to the table in terms of stamina, in terms of speed, in terms of ground preference, what are the sort of most famous progeny of those particular sires, then you can find that stuff out pretty easily. So it's actually you can certainly gain a sort of at least a surface level of knowledge relatively easily if you go through that.
You can.
That channel.
Yeah, which I avoided doing entirely because I just thought it was overwhelming for a long time. And actually, you would never, if you're watching racing on the TV or taking in some of the sort of mainstream pundit stuff, you don't really get, particularly for National Hunt racing, you don't get hit with the parentage thing, the pedigree thing so much. So you sort of think, oh, that's not that important. I don't really need to know about that. Or I'm not interested. I'd rather spend my time looking at form or exactly, form or the preference for ground or whatever. But it's, like you say, I think it's relatively easy to start to get into. I'm only at the start. Very much enjoyed making those patterns and connections so far this season. Yeah, it's an interesting world for sure.
Yeah, it really is. I think if it becomes an area of interest in itself, it can do. In the same way that a cricket enthusiast pores over the pages of the Wisden Annual every year. And you hear plenty of people talk about that, particularly they're in the breeding industry now, that just have a kind of a fascinated interest in the detail that you can get into. So not everybody is going to go into that level of detail, but I think it's the sort of thing that you can get hooked on quite easily. And it'd be interesting to see, when we get to Cheltenham next week, John Bon and Classic Getaway, both equal the purchase price record for a National Hunt horse. I think it was £570,000 they each cost. So it'll be interesting to see whether money does indeed buy success. In 12 days' time. So that's Pedigree. I mean, very much a sort of a beginner's guide, if you want to call it that.
It's a beginner's chat, yeah.
But it's an interesting topic, and one that we wanted to at least just kind of share our relatively fledgling experiences on. So with that, we will move on to our next segment. And given that we're so close to the festival, we thought let's do another Antepost. And we were thinking about which races to cover. Obviously, the handicap of the weights this week, so we've got more sort of clarity on the likely runners and the weights they'll carry, particularly the Irish horses. That's the key thing, isn't it, when they get given their weights? But we've actually settled on the Stayers Hurdle, which, Bruno, I know was a race that you felt merited some scrutiny.
Yeah, I thought it ties in quite nicely with what we just talked about on Pedigree, because there was, maybe you've got a better version of the quote than I do, but I'll paraphrase a recent Ruby Walsh quote around breeding and the Stayers Hurdle. And the quote is something like, you don't breed a horse to win the Stayers Hurdle. generally you're breeding, particularly in the National Hunt Game, you're breeding for chasing, going over fences and winning those big prizes. But so what you're left with the Stayers Hurdle is a kind of bunch of very, very talented misfits in many ways, in that you've got lots of different stories behind the horses that are entered here. Many who haven't come the traditional route of maybe being entered in the novice equivalent of this race, the Albert Bartlett, the previous season, and stepping into that race. In fact, another quiz question for you on that exact point.
Yeah.
So 26 runners in this year's Stayers as it stands. How many of those have run in an Albert Bartlett before?
Oh, without looking at the card, I'm gonna assume that it's not many. So
yeah, it wouldn't have been a great. Well, okay, it's 5.
Oh,
which is pretty low.
It's pretty low.
I guess if you'd compare that, I should have done the comparison really from a supreme novice into a champion hurdle, but that is definitely a well-trodden path. Whereas going from the Albert Bartlett into this is not the case. Albert Bartlett, if anything, is a kind of novice race for future staying chasers, isn't it? So that was another interesting little fact I wanted to share about the Stayers.
Yeah, well, this is rapidly becoming a theme with you, isn't it? You're dropping these quiz questions on me. We're going to have to start having a whole extra section on let's get quizzical with Bruno. But on that point, I wanted to have a look at the sort of entries for this year and to sort of see what their backgrounds were. And it really did prove the point quite without going particularly far down the betting. That you can have, generally the Stayers Hurdle entries are classy novice hurdlers that have been kept to the smaller obstacles, or they're failed chasers. To the point you just made. But if you look at there was 4 that I picked out just to try and illustrate the point. So Flooring Porter is favourite and won it last year, and he'll win it again this year. And he has come up through novice hurdles and then handicap hurdles in his first season out of novice hurdling. So that included last year a steep rise from a mark of 122 to a mark of 164, where he ended the season, which included a Stayers Hurdle victory at Cheltenham. So his pedigree implies stamina, and his sire is Yates, who is a known sire of top-class staying chasers. That's Conflated, Chantry House, just to name a couple at the sort of the upper end of his progeny list. But Gavin Cromwell decided to stick to hurdles last season. And I thought, Flooring Porter's known not to be the easiest ride. And so perhaps that's part of the reason that he decided to keep him over hurdles last season. And then, of course, after he won last season's Stayers Hurdle, it's likely that Gavin probably thought, let's stick with this rather than start schooling him over fences and, risk him not taking to it. So he's an interesting one. Conversely, Champ went novice chasing after his novice hurdle season, and he won, which is sort of more kind of traditional to what you were mentioning a minute ago, Bruno, about generally these horses will go hurdling as novices, and then they'll try, trainers will try and send them over the bigger obstacles. So he won the 3-mile Grade 1 novice chase at the festival 2 years ago, beating Manila Indo and Allaho famously. But then was pulled up in last year's Gold Cup, and very apparent problems with his jumping over the bigger obstacles have meant subsequently that Nicky has sent him back over hurdles, and to good effect. So Champ, interestingly, was a novice hurdler at 6 and then a novice chaser at 7. So he started at least a year later than most. And his chasing frailties only really presented in the second season of his chasing career. But generally, horses that have a go novice chasing after their novice hurdle season will then have more time to come back and excel over hurdles if that doesn't pay off. So even though Champ is a bit older, he's sort of an example of that. Sporting John is perhaps the best example of that in this year's race. So having been a Grade 1 winning, but ultimately failed novice chaser by the age of 6, meaning he's only 7 going into the festival this year, given his apparent sort of reincarnation over hurdles this season, he could be a player in this division for the next 2 or 3 years, because he went novice chasing, earlier than Champ did. And then just to provide a fourth angle to this, Classical Dream, who is a supreme winner, who completely flopped in his second season hurdling. He was, short price for the champion hurdle at the beginning of that season. And then he came back after a 16-month break and famously won a 3-mile Grade 1 at Punchestown, having never raced over further than 2 miles. So it just shows that the top 2-mile hurdlers over the top hurdlers over the shorter trip shouldn't be discounted in a race like the Stayers either. So hopefully that just sort of goes to illustrate that it really does take all sorts.
Yeah, it does. But I like a plan. Okay, I like ones that are potentially aimed at this from a way out. So if we're moving on to our sort of fancies for this,
which we are,
then I am focusing in on that short list of previous Albert Bartlett runners. And just to name check those 5, you've got Time Hill, Paisley Park, Lisnagar Oscar, Commander of Fleet, and Alaphilippe. They're all previous Albert Bartlett runners, none of which have actually won the Albert Bartlett. But certainly 2, and the 2 I'm going to pick out ran very, very good races in their respective Albert Bartlett. And the first one from near enough the top of the market is Time Hill. I like him. I like him because he's had 2 excellent runs at the festival in defeat. Second of which, of course, was in that Albert Bartlett, which featured Monkfish won it by a neck to Fury Road. Then after that, it's evading me. Latest Exhibition, that's the horse, Paul Nolan horse, was 3rd, and then Time Hill was actually really unlucky. I watched it again yesterday, and he was kind of blocked up on the run-in. I think I'd probably backed it because I sort of looked at it with a bit of a wince. Thinking, he's not going to get there.
I definitely had painful moments of that race.
And he was sort of blocked off twice on that run-in, and it was a great finish. And he's a really gutsy horse. I think every time you've seen him run, he kind of comes off the bridle fairly early on. He's not one of these, sexy travelling horses that don't need much attention. He needs to be wound up fairly early on, but he finds a hell of a lot. So I think that's going to pay off in a very, very competitive renewal of this race. I think particularly if it's soft ground, which we'll come back to a bit later on, I think that's going to make this even more of a stamina test than it already is. So I like him from the top of the market. And then one at a price that I like is Commander of Fleet, who actually probably in terms of high quality Albert Bartletts, he was in probably the highest quality one of living memory. He actually was 2nd to Minella Indo. 3rd in that race was Allaho. And obviously those 2 have gone on to festival successes last year. He had a long gap after that season, Commander of Fleet did, of about 18 months. And this season, he looks like he's just coming back to form. He won 1 big field handicap over at Navan in Ireland back in December. He's had a couple of poor performances on soft ground. So, again, I think he'd be looking for decent ground at Cheltenham. But I like him at a huge price. I think you can get 66 to 1.
Wow.
About him. Look, he's been beaten by the market principles this season as well, so there's no nothing to say that won't happen again. But I just thought at a price he was of interest. He's also got an entry in the Coral Cup as well, so no guarantees that will go here, but you can get your non-runner no bets going, then which I might do, then why not? Yeah. So those are my 2 for this.
Fantastic. Well, my 2 are very unoriginal, and I've already kind of given it away. The one at the top of the market is I like Flooring Porter. I watched his Cheltenham win back yesterday, and he jumped supremely well. He's for a horse that I think there were question marks about going into Cheltenham, just in terms of the fact that he's a bit of a headbanger. He needs a rail on the inside to help keep him sort of straight,
right?
But there's various places along the course at Cheltenham where the rail sort of disappears. But to the untrained eye anyway, he looked a relatively straightforward ride for Danny Mullins that day. Jumped superbly, wandered around a little bit after he jumped the last, but made all, had everything else at it from quite a long way out, and just stayed supremely well. His form this season has been pretty good too. I mean, he was, fell in the 2.5 mile race at Navan. I forget the name of that one now. I'm going to get that. The Lismarlin hurdle. And it wasn't necessarily given that he was going to win, but he was certainly going to be in the mix up at the end. And that was over 2.5 miles, so possibly, a little bit short of his preferred trip. And then obviously, many people will know, over Christmas at Leopardstown, Classical Dream got a jump on him from the start, and he was only beaten by 2 lengths. So were it not for that, then we could well be looking at a horse that was coming into this off the back of another Grade 1 win at Leopardstown over Christmas. So I really like him. He's only 7, so that you have to think that there is more to come from him, even if he ran to the same level that he did in this race last year. I think he's going to be very difficult to beat. His form in the last year, 15 months, is exceptional. The one at a price I like does sort of tie in with Flooring Porter a little bit, but more in terms of his conqueror at Leopardstown, Classical Dream. In that race at Goran, which Classical Dream was 1-3 favourite for back at the end of January, a horse called Royal Kahala won that. And now she is likely, she's certainly has a soft ground preference, and is a horse that has clearly been on the upward curve this year. Classical Dream probably didn't run his race last time, I think it is fair to say, but second to Royal Kahala and staying on very well at the finish was Home by the Lee for Joseph O'Brien. Now, Ashdale Bob was back in third. Ashdale Bob very nearly won last weekend. Just got nabbed. So was it last weekend or middle of?
Yeah, last weekend. Yeah. Yes.
Or the Thursday or something of. Anyway, and might have been Boyne Hurdle Day actually, the rescheduled Boyne Hurdle day. And so I just thought that was very interesting. You've got to be prepared to take a bit of a punt if you're looking for something that's lower down in the market, but you can get 50s about Home by the Lee, and he's also only 7. So I was interested in him. He's only, as far as I could see anyway, he has been chasing last season, but he was this season he's been his last 2 runs over hurdles, ran over 2 miles 3, came second to Darva Star, who's had a good season, and then stepping up to 3 miles last time. He did very well in a Grade 2, so he'd be of interest for me at a big price.
Yeah, it's a good race. This, I do think it's competitive, and I know it's probably out of the 4 champion races, with one of each happening on each day of the festival, it's probably the least scrutinised or at least sexiest one, I suppose. But I think it's one of the better competitive races out of those 4 for sure. And there's some good stories there. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised to see Champ either completely, blow up or just come there and win it very, very easily. That would be a hell of a story as well, given his relationship with the festival being so up and down.
Yeah.
And we haven't even mentioned Paisley Park, who the previous winner just won, beating Champ at Ascot, was it?
He was beaten by Champ at Ascot. And then
beaten by Champ at Ascot, and then beat Champ at Cheltenham. So, it's how's Paisley Park now? 10 or 11?
He is 11, I think. No, he's 10.
Yeah,
10.
He's 10. So he's getting on, but that'd be a hell of a story as well. So there's lots of layers to this race, and that's why I like it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, well, I think there's all these different angles, and it's you can have a lot of different opinions. And we've chosen 4 different horses between us, so that just goes to show. On to the weekend review. We're going to do the weekend review and the weekend preview back to back. So the first thing to say is, Bruno, you had a winner last weekend.
I know.
What's going on?
A stop clock, right, twice a day. What's the phrase? Something like that. Yeah. I think I got a little bit of fortunate as well with Knights of Liverpool. I don't know what you think, but he certainly he travelled very well. He jumped very, very quickly. Perhaps just hit the front a little bit too soon. And Teddy Blue, or the electrically informed Gary Moore, looked like he was going to make it a real contest coming to the last hurdle, and just made a mess of it. And ultimately that was that. So it would have been tight, I think. What do you reckon?
I think it would have been tight, yeah. I knew he'd won, but I was watching the replay and I saw Teddy Blue coming, and so I kind of anticipated a big mistake. because I think, had I been watching that race live, I would have feared the worst for Night Salute. But he is a horse that keeps getting it done.
He does. He's unbeaten over hurdles. He's won at Cheltenham, which none of the other. Apart from Pied Piper, none of the other market principals in the Triumph Hurdle, where he's headed next, have done yet. And you'd have to say he's probably the best of British when it comes to juvenile hurdlers. But he's sort of priced. He's still very reasonably priced, given the focus on the Irish trained types coming over for it being such a good crop. So yes, he was good, and I think with that, I'm in the lead in our tipping challenge.
You are, yeah. I mean, neither of our figures make for particularly, spectacular reading, but you are fractionally. I'm minus 2.5, and you're minus 2.125.
Oh,
so good for you.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get. I mean, we really should, get ourselves back into the black pretty quickly now, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
We've had our warm up, so we can stop messing about. Ansam was very disappointing last weekend. He didn't. I had my fears about the only fear I had really, because I was, as I said, it was a confident bet for me last week, was the form of Evan Williams's yard, and he said since that he doesn't think his horses are running quite at the top of their game, and I feel that was pretty apparent. He missed a few jumps on the way round, was pulled up in the end, and I don't think that helped. But his jumping was pretty assured at Ascot. It's just possible that Kempton is a much quicker track than Ascot. So it's possible that he just was jumping at a speed that was a little bit uncomfortable for him, given that he looked a sort of galloping, remorseless 3 mile chaser when he won at Ascot. So I'll be sticking with him for sure. Maybe it's interesting that Evan Williams chose to send him to Kempton. It does sort of make you wonder how these trainers operate. And you think a race like the Ultima would have been sort of much more suitable for him, but
and I guess
I don't know.
Yeah, Kempton is a track where if you don't get into a rhythm with your jumping, because it's described as a quick track. And actually, we saw that probably in the King George over Christmas, where some big names didn't get into a rhythm at all with their jumping, and they were out of it. Chantry House, for example, obviously Manella Indo pulled up as well. So you're right. So maybe more of a galloping track would be better suited to him. Give Evan a call and see what he thinks about that.
I will. Yeah, I will. I'll get him on the WhatsApps.
And there's another point there around trainer form. It keeps kind of cropping up for me around, trainers revealing that theirs aren't running that well, there's a problem in the yard, and how it really does have an impact on all of their horses in many cases. So just want to watch out where you get a good quote like that. It might just guide you one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So our two big takeaways from last weekend then. So, I mean, you've mentioned Night Salute and Teddy Blue, Bruno already, but there was another one that you wanted to pick out from last weekend.
Yes, one over at Naas with a view to the Champion Bumper. So there's a bumper run at Naas, which was won by Music Drive for Gordon Elliott, beating a horse called Sandor Clegane. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because these two can tie in some of the leading horses in the Champion Bumper in Facile Vega and Redemption Day, both Willie Mullins trained horses. Facile Vega is currently the even money favourite for the Champion Bumper. Sandor Clegane was second to Facile Vega, beaten 12 lengths. Music Drive was second to Redemption Day, beaten 4 lengths. So when you tie all that together, and bear in mind Redemption Day is 6-1 for the Champion Bumper, maybe Facile Vega and Redemption Day are a little bit closer than the prices suggest. That was just the interesting takeaway for me. And maybe, as so often happens with the bumper, there is often a favourite that seems to be the only winner, but actually there's quite the crop this year. Generally, all from the Mullins yard, who could well challenge the market leader there. So, just a suggestion that maybe that's a bit tighter than the betting market suggests.
Yeah. Who is Sandor Clegane? Quick question for you now.
Oh, it sounds like some sort of, medieval warrior.
Yeah, you're in the right ballpark.
Am I? Okay.
Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I certainly am, but it's been years since that's been on the telly. So
The Hound.
remind
It's the
me.
Hound.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
I like the Hound. Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant. Is that his actual name?
That's his actual name. Yeah.
Okay.
What you rarely hear it, but that is his actual name. So there you go.
Brilliant.
So my two takeaways from last weekend then. So one is more obvious than the other. So I Care Allen at Fairy House on Saturday won a grade 3, I think it was, beating a pretty good yardstick in White Pepper and Prairie Dancer, or pretty good yardsticks in those two, I should say. I then watched a Willie Mullins Cheltenham stable tour earlier this week, and I was just very taken by, I know Willie well, so I can tell just by a look when he's really excited about a horse. But I noticed that, I suppose a glint in his eye, to use a well-worn cliche, about this horse, and he described him as, he said he could be a fair tool. And he said that there's a good there was a chance that he could go to the Fred Winter rather than the Triumph. Now, if he goes to the Fred Winter, I think he's got a huge chance. JP obviously loves a big Cheltenham handicap. I think if you look at I Care Allen's form from the Dublin Racing Festival behind Vauban, Fildor, Il Était Temps, the way that race panned out, I think you would be stretching it, even with a bit of progression for, which can be allowed for with these juveniles, to think he could win a Triumph. But I think he'd have an absolutely belting chance in the Fred Winter. So I backed him for that at sort of, I think you get sort of 19s on the or 20s on the exchanges. He was very interesting. And then the other one was the Dovecote at Kempton on Saturday. Isio. It completely passed me by. I actually quite like the look of this one. I didn't back him because of the stable form, but I thought it was interesting to see Paul running a 4-year-old in a race like this, and Isio turning in, looked well beaten. I think it's Harry Cobden, didn't go for him at all, and then suddenly flashes home for a 6-length fourth, finishing really strongly without, as I said, really ever being asked to go and try and close on the leaders. Now, the leaders, Orkin Rees and Shall We Have One More, are both horses that, I think people think sort of rate fairly highly. So Isio, for a yard that is still maybe not completely out of the doldrums, ran a very eye-catching race. He's only a 4-year-old, so he went straight into my tracker off the back of that one.
Interesting. And he ran in behind Pied Piper at Cheltenham, didn't he? So a little form boost for Pied Piper there, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, I think that was in the midst of the Paul Nicholls stable form being really poor, and so I think had he been more to form, then he would have been he definitely would have been closer to Pied Piper. But yes, I think that certainly shows.
He was much closer in the betting that day. I remember they were kind of buying favouritism to a point, and then a load of money came for Pied Piper. But yeah, interesting. I didn't even notice that. So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Well, it's one of these things. If you listen to Talking Horses podcast, every once in a while you get a nugget like that. Right, weekend preview. Chris Nappy. We're going to do 2 each. And I'll start with you, Brynge.
Yeah, hopefully we've not got the same ones here. I'll start. Both of mine are from Kelso. It's Kelso's big day. Yes. It feels like in the calendar. And the one I'm going to look at first is the Premier Chase, which is a 3-mile chase. It's at 240. I guess just one horse to pick out from this that I'm interested in seeing how he's doing, basically, and that's Espoir de Rome. We saw him last season running an absolute blinder at Aintree in a Grade 1 in April, and he looked like he was certainly going to give Chantry House a very good race, if not beat him. He was definitely going the best out of the two of them before he fell at the second last fence. Miles ahead of horses who have come out this season and run well in Sham Blue and Fiddler on the Roof. He reappeared at Carlisle back in October or November of this year. Very disappointing. It was over 2.5 miles. Perhaps not his preferred trip, but he's done a lot of running over that distance. But it was disappointing. It was kind of billed as a Espoir de Rome versus Ahoy Senior duel, and both of them were disappointing. Ahoy Senior unseated, I think, having been beaten already. So I'm just intrigued to see how he's getting on, because he's been off since then. So that's quite a long layoff. So I'm just interested in that Premier Chase at 240 from that angle, and some other seasoned chasing types in there as well that he'll be up against. But he looks like the most progressive of the lot. And the second race I'm going to look at from Kelso is the Moor Battle Hurdle, which looks like a cracking race. Very, very competitive. And I just wanted to check, actually, that Autumn Evening is definitely declared for this.
He is.
He is. Big eye catcher at the Dublin Racing Festival. We mentioned it a couple of weeks back in one of the big field handicaps. Good form also before that, particularly in the Fishery Lane hurdle at Naas back in November, where she was battling out with Tiopu, who we talked about last week, before falling two from the finish. So I like Autumn Evening in that, so much so that Autumn Evening is my weekend selection. But it's a good race that. You've got Bouvardere in there as well, which is, and there's plenty of others. Metier runs in this as well, and that's a horse that ties in with a lot of the kind of triumph form from previous years and that kind of thing. So, I like Autumn Evening, but it's going to be a good race.
It is going to be a good race. I messaged you about this the other day, and you said, hands off my tip. So I very kindly allowed you to have that one. Yes, I like Autumn Evening too. I narrowed it down to Metier, Autumn Evening, and Favour, which is not particularly helpful as they're three of the top four of the betting. But it's 6-1 the field, so it does show you that it's definitely a competitive one. So and I'm fascinated to see how Espoir de Rame does. He could absolutely hose up, but I'd just be worried about why he's been off for so long. I backed him for the King George at one point. I thought he was going to be, seriously high flyer this year. But he may yet be. So really good to see him back on the racetrack. So there's two horses that I'm going to mention then. One is the 220 at Doncaster. It's the Mares Novice Hurdle listed race, and it's Get a Tonic for Dan Skelton. So she has got really good form in her last two runs. One that ties in with the horse that is now, I think, favourite for the Albert Bartlett, which is Hillcrest. She was a 13-leg third to him, but for a young mare, showed sort of really sort of lots of promise that day. Stayed on up the hill pretty well, and then last time out at Warwick, she was second behind my winning tip that day, which was Marie's Rock. Now, I really like Marie's Rock for the Mayor's Hurdle. So I think if I'm going to follow that line of form, then I have to be with Get a Tonic. She's going to be pretty short. She would have been my weekend selection, but she's a shade of odds on at the moment. So I'm going to look elsewhere for my weekend tip. I was really struggling to find anything I had a strong opinion on. I looked long and hard at the Moor Battle, and like you said, super competitive. And so I thought, well, I'll just go for a race where I have an opinion and I have some knowledge about the majority of the runners. So I found myself looking at the Greatwood Gold Cup Handicap Chase, the 150 at Newbury. And I've been able to sort of narrow it down to two that I really like there. Now, the important thing to note is that the rain has come this week, but the ground is soft at Newbury, but I don't think it's going to get any softer. The forecast in the next couple of days doesn't look too bad. It looks relatively dry. So I'm sort of hoping that is the case, because I think if it does get much wetter, then one of my fancies here is probably not going to enjoy that. And that's Tamarok du Matin. He just looks supremely well handicapped off a mark of 142, given that he was second to Shishkin at Kempton in December 2020 in the Wayward Lad Novices Chase. He then won a Grade 2 at Kempton in February last year. His form since then doesn't make for particularly good reading. Unseated rider, pulled up, and then he was fifth last time at Sandown. But if you watch that race back, he actually travelled through it really promisingly before sort of fading after jumping the pond fence in contention. This is his second run after a wind up. He's 7 years old. Paul Nicholls has got an amazing record in the Greatwood. And I think that as long as the ground isn't too soft, then Tamarok du Matin has got a great chance. The other one that I really like is a Moolah Gold at a bigger price. You can get 12-1, the early prices here. We're obviously recording this as usual on a Thursday lunchtime. And Gold's always looked a strong stayer at 2 miles. And when he does win over that trip, he's getting up right on the line. He's always looked as though a step up to 2.5 miles would suit. He did that last time at Warwick, and he came a 6 3/4 length third to Celebra Dalen, who is now a lot of people's fancy for the plate at Cheltenham. And staying on very well at the finish. Now, Warwick is a speed track. I think Amula Gold probably doesn't necessarily want that, and he had quite a lot to do. But the fact that he stayed on so well at the finish just makes me think that he's absolutely worth another go at this trip. He's down £2 for that run, and Jack Andrews takes off 5. Now, I was having a look at Jack Andrews because I don't know how many winners he's had this season. I think he's sort of hardly been sort of one of these prolific claimers, but if Mamula Gold can run off a mark of 1:43, then that takes him well below the mark that he was beating Monsieur Lecoq and losing by a short head to before midnight off at in the first half of this season. So I like both of them, and I think, given that I have more confidence in Amula Gold's ability to go on the ground, that I'm going to pick Amula Gold as my weekend selection at 12-1.
I'm just surprised you've napped a horse at Newbury, which is our absolute graveyard for. But God, what? Yeah,
I thought the very same. Yeah. But it
good
has
man,
to change.
good for you, brave.
It has to change. I've always liked that horse, and I think he's got a good chance. The Skeletons are in good form. So yes, I know, but my bravery could be horribly misplaced. But there's lots to like about him. So
no, very good, excellent.
Right, so on to the final bit of this week's show. 3 hours. We're going to rattle through 3 quick questions before we reach the finish line. So firstly, we started this last week at the behest of a friend of ours who wanted us to have a look at the trainer form each week. So Bruno, you've very kindly managed to pluck out the top and bottom sort of in form and out of form trainers. Do you have the figure in front of you, or shall I talk through it quickly?
I'll go through it by all means, but 2 that stick out for me. Gary Moore obviously had a phenomenal week. I think he had a 4-timer at Fontwell on Sunday. I think he's now up in the mid-30s in terms of the last 2 weeks.
37.5.
Yeah, which is hugely impressive. And he's got a good crop of. He always has a good crop of sort of young hurdlers, so he could be interesting just a track going into the festival, and one who's not high up in that league table there, but who I think's just turning a corner is Henry de Bromhead, who obviously saddles plenty of exciting prospects at the festival. He's just edged up into the early 20% mark in terms of winners to runners, and he had a nice double at Navan on Sunday. So I just thought that was worth noting, given he saddles some market principles, and it's been a significant long period of, just not fantastic form, middling to below average for that yard. So I just thought that was worth noting.
Absolutely, yeah. I that jumped out at me too. The only other one that jumped out was Kim Bailey. He seems to be right back in form again, 30.77% in the last 2 weeks. They had an amazing season last season, and were perhaps always going to struggle to follow that up. But the first half of this season, the horses really didn't seem to be running as well as they should. But he looks to be back now, so maybe that is a good omen for Espoir de Romay.
Yeah, that was the reason I was tempted to make Espoir de Romay my weekend tip, just based on that, but. It's a watching brief instead, but yeah, good form from that yard for sure.
And then the Tizzards appear to be on the other end of the scale, having another one of their troughs. I'd be fascinated to know what goes on in that yard, because they are incredibly streaky. When they're hot, they are red hot, but then they'll have these periods where, they're down at 11.54%. So I don't like the Tizzards at Cheltenham. They don't have a particularly good record, and I'm not sure how much stock you should put in that, but there's just something when I see a Tizzard horse entered for a Cheltenham race, and I always tend to look elsewhere. I know they had Native River, but they haven't had much else.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a particularly vintage kind of crop they've got at the moment, either in many cases, certainly when it comes to that absolute top of the pops festival like Cheltenham.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you got, the rest of the Tristan Davies, Paul Nicholls, Philip Hobbs, Dan Skelton, they're all between 16 and 18%, which is, it's hardly problematic, but not red hot either. But I wouldn't say that sort of strike rate. We were talking with Tom Dascombe, who's the former trainer at Manor House last summer, and he was going through a sort of a bad spot, and he said, look, I generally want to be operating at around about 15%. If I'm doing that, then I'm generally pretty happy. So I sort of kept that number in mind, and so if you've got a trainer that's somewhere between 15 and 20% strike rate, I wouldn't think that is representative of too much of an issue. The one I couldn't find, actually, from what you'd sent, and I might just have a very quick look, was Venetia, because she has had a bug in the yard, hasn't she?
Yes. I'm wondering if she's not on that list because she's decided not to run any.
So she's 12%.
Right, okay.
So that is just worth noting. I really like Brave Shaska in the Grand Annual, for example. I know plenty of people like Long Presse, but she's definitely had horses have had runny noses the last week or two. So worth noting with the festival in mind, perhaps.
Indeed.
On to our second question then. Mudlarks, with plenty of rain in the forecast between now and the 15th of March, whose chance would be significantly boosted by soft ground at Cheltenham? I'm going to have a stab at this one first. So it's tied in with, earlier you mentioned that Night Salute was perhaps the best of the British for the Triumph. If it rains, then the best of the British will be Porticello.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he would have a significantly better chance of being competitive in the Triumph if we were looking at soft ground or worse. So that's my one.
Impressive at Haydock, wasn't he, in bottomless ground? He absolutely sliced through it and won by a long way. So yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Two I've got. Royal Kahala, we already mentioned for the Mares' Hurdle, and you referenced the ground preference there. I think she'd be certainly of interest. And on that's on the opening day, isn't it? On the Tuesday, where even if forecast doesn't turn out to be, pouring with rain, that's generally when the softer ground will be anyway, because the grounds people down at Cheltenham will be getting, ensuring that there is some cut in the ground for the opening day. So Royal Kahala on the Tuesday for the Mares' Hurdle, and then another Royal is Royale Pagaille, who I think is an improved horse. And I think, again, the Gold Cup is open, and maybe we'll look at the Gold Cup next week in more detail. But you'd have to say with, the requisite cut in the ground that he'd need, that would be of interest.
Absolutely. Well, I'd found what I thought was a lovely long shot for the Gold Cup in Fiddler on the Roof, but it seems like they're most likely to just keep him back for the National. So I'm going to have to find something else at a price for the Gold Cup. And he was on my shortlist of horses that would relish the rain. So good shout. Right, we're going to finish with a jargon bust. British ratings for Irish horses running in Cheltenham handicaps were revealed this week. Why is there a discrepancy between the BHA and the IHRB rating systems, and what is the impact for the festival this year? Bruno, I'm going to chuck that one over to you.
Yeah, so the reason for the discrepancy is that, very simply, there are two different systems. One over in Ireland run by the Irish handicapper, and one here in Britain run by the British handicapper. Now, they do get together, those guys, once a year, I learned. After the Punchestown Festival at the end of April, they get together and they form an Anglo-Irish classification. But that only happens once a year. So when you have these kind of pan-British Isles festivals like Cheltenham, where there's plenty of Irish representation, then in March, or at the end of Feb, as it was this year, the British handicapper has the job of rating Irish horses that are entered into handicaps at Cheltenham. So that's the kind of the background as to why that happens. The big picture from last year in regards to Cheltenham handicaps is that the Irish won 7 of the 9. So there was a review done essentially by the British handicappers to understand why that's happening. And what has come out from that essentially is that you've got British horses more leniently treated this year versus last year. Here's a stat. 47% of British entries into Cheltenham handicaps are racing off a lower mark than what they had at the beginning of the season, compared to just over 30% last year. Now, the same leniency isn't happening with the Irish horses coming over. And in the case of the handicap hurdles this year, on average, their British rating is just under £5 higher than their Irish rating. Whereas last year, that average kind of differential was just under £4. So there's a definite levelling of the playing field happening there, given the drubbing that the Irish dished out last year. So in theory, in terms of impact for Cheltenham, the Irish dominance in those handicaps should be kind of curbed. Yeah. That's in theory what should happen. However, it could be that the Irish have so many horses going in for the handicaps, which they do, I think, more than ever, that they actually might end up kicking out quite a few of the British horses who don't have a high enough rating to get into the requisite number of spots. So that's how it works, and that's why there's a potential, a glimmer of light for Team Britain to get a few more wins on.
The British reply to what happened at Cheltenham last season is to drop all their horses to the handicap mark. So much so that they don't get into the handicaps themselves.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what might happen. So it could be a bizarre response. I think there's been generally over the long term quite an inflation of ratings in Britain. Corso Star, for example, I think is the highest ever rated horse at 191 or something. So from those days, that kind of dragged everything up. And meant there's this discrepancy that's not worked out in favour of the British when it comes to handicaps in recent years. And also there's clearly a swing towards Ireland in terms of quality of the horses as well. So that's why this thing is interesting. It's also very subjective, and it's open to the opinion of a few people, i.e. the handicappers, deciding what the right marks are. So that was interesting. Some notable. All right, I had a fact for you actually on this point around a couple of horses. So some notable differentials between Irish mark and British mark. Buddy Rich has been hit pretty hard. He's going for the Grand Annual. He's £6 higher in Britain than he is in Ireland. Winter Fog, who's going for the Potemps, is £7 higher.
Yeah, won't stop him.
It should be fine. And then in terms of leniently dealt with Irish horses, which might be worth keeping an eye on, Champion Green is the same mark, and he's going for the Boodles. Phil Dorr, who might not go for a handicap, but if he does, he's only £1 higher than his Irish mark. And Echoes in Rain, who I like for the county, she's only £1 higher as well. So just a few call-outs of ones who've been harshly treated and less harshly treated.
Yeah, you've taken a long time to jump this last.
Still cracking it.
You spent a lot of time in the air. Yes, you've taken off from outside of the wings, and you've gone over a fence, a water jump. Yeah, all sorts. No, brilliant, very interesting. Thank you for that. That's got me thinking even more about the Cheltenham handicaps than I was already. Fantastic, Bruno, as always. Thank you, my man. Another episode.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
In the books. So thank you all for listening. As always, remember you can access the pod through all your favourite podcast platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google. We're now on Amazon as well. Please follow the pod and leave a review if you're so inclined. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel for the video versions. And also make sure to follow Talking Horses Podcast, all one word, on Instagram for news about the podcast and plenty else from the racing world. And lastly, do please leave your questions on any of those platforms if you have something you'd like us to tackle on next week's show. It's been fun doing the trainer form stuff. So thank you, James, for your suggestion on that. And hopefully there'll be more like that to come. Enjoy the racing this weekend. God, it's so close to Cheltenham. I can practically taste it. Gamble responsibly, and we will see you all next week for the final episode before the 2022 Cheltenham Festival. Cheers for now.
See you next week.